Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing Starfield again, and I hope we're getting close to the time where we'll be seeing a trailer for all 6 of us fans of Starfield that are theorizing about the next story expansion, which we know will be named Starborn. But this, I think for a lot of people, is Bethesda's final shot at really cementing Starfield as a heavy-hitting IP with the likes of Elder Scrolls and Fallout. And I think maybe that time may have also passed, but for me, this could be the one that really cements it. A chance to say they aren't a two-trick pony, that they are, in fact, a three-trick pony, but that has yet to be decided, of course. Now, if you're new here, at the end of the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I would be, personally, most grateful. On this channel, I've got some videos theorizing on games, talking about games, playing games, and I'm all around down with anything involving video games or tabletop games. And if you are too, please join us in our Discord down below. We have a pretty fun, funny, and wholesome group of gamers, and I sure as heck would be happy to have you join us. Now that all that YouTuber crap is out of the way, let's dive into part 1 of this video, which is going to be really the shattered space problem. Because before we dive into ideas I have that will be more on the fun and speculative end for future DLCs for Starfield, we have to get shattered space out of the way. And please know this will probably contain spoilers for shattered space as well as base game Starfield moving forward. So if you want to avoid any of that, feel free to jump on out of here right now. You're not going to offend me, but come back maybe once you've played the game and you want to theorize on the future of this game that all 6 of us hold so dearly. Now, I've had this discussion in our Discord many times since the universe's only other Starfield fans besides me are in there. Like I say, all 6 of us. And as a note, up ahead, I will discuss other Bethesda titles, namely the Elder Scrolls and Fallout games, of course. Their story expansions are what I'm going to use to draw comparisons so you kind of know where my opinions and feelings are coming from. So let me start this by saying I really like base game Starfield. I had a lot of fun shipbuilding, exploring, doing all the faction quests, and I thought it tackled and kind of really wrestled with some very interesting like metaphysical and spiritual concepts, right? Like reincarnation and things like that in multiple universes. Kind of topics I haven't really seen Bethesda mention since the days of like Kirkbride just strung out writing Morrowind lore, and it gave me some hope that a kernel of some of that kind of wacky side of Bethesda talent was still in there. Talent that wasn't completely absent in recent years, mind you, but certainly felt to me in a lot of ways like it was hiding. But it has shown in flashes of brilliance. You know, I always found, starting with Skyrim, that the main quests for like Skyrim, Fallout 4, not really good. But it was like the DLCs and the expansions that really, you know, for me it was kind of the meat and potatoes of the games. And you would see these flashes of brilliance in things like Dawnguard, Dragonborn, and Far Harbor. But, in my opinion, this was nowhere to be found in Shattered Space. When I buy a Bethesda DLC, I usually have a certain expectation depending on what it is. Even in the world of Starfield, the settled systems is much larger in terms of land and areas to explore than, say, Vardenfell in Morrowind or the Capital Wasteland in Fallout 3. But I feel like their expansions held true to certain formulas, good or ill. If it took place in the existing world space we already know, there usually needed to be added features or like kind of overhauls to existing ones that didn't quite have enough punch to them, or just ones that were just plain bad. You know, like for example, Dawnguard, sure, it added new locations in Skyrim, but it still took place in Skyrim, the same tract of land we had always known in-game, but they had completely overhauled things like vampirism and lycanthropy, giving them skill trees and more incentives to actually become a werewolf or a vampire. And Knights of the Nine, while still taking place in Cyrodiil, and adding new locations here like Garlus Malatar and maybe like Fort Bulwark, but they still, you know, they had a cool new faction to join, a badass new set of armor to acquire, and a whole host of knights who would follow you into battle. It was, at the time, a very interesting gimmick if compared to their later games, maybe lacking technically. But using Elder Scrolls as an example again, it perfectly exemplified the other kinds of expansions Bethesda would make, the kind that took you out of the existing game world and took you somewhere new entirely. In addition to a story expansion, you would get a beautifully crafted new part of the world to explore. Morrowind did this twice, with Blood Moon taking you to the island of Solstheim, which, as a bit of a tangent, is my favorite location in all of the entirety of the Elder Scrolls universe. I love Solstheim from the first time I ever went there, but let me move forward. And we had Tribunal as well in Morrowind, taking you to the capital city of Mournhold on the mainland of Morrowind. Oblivion had a very similar expansion with Shivering Isles, taking you to the realm of Oblivion by the same name, ruled over by Sheogorath, Daedric Prince of Madness. Skyrim did this again with Dragonborn, taking you, not only back to my beloved Solstheim, but also Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's realm of Oblivion. Yes, EXO, I can hear you cheering from here. Now, Fallout 3 had 5 expansions, which did a mix of these things, as well as New Vegas and Fallout 4. In Fallout 4's case, I liked Automatron and Far Harbor. I wasn't a big fan of Nuka World, but I'll pull back on that because this isn't a Fallout video. The relevance this has to Starfield is just to show you that I've been in the Bethesda fandom for quite some time. I've been playing their games since I was a kid in 2004 with the release of Morrowind on the Xbox. While I didn't own a copy of this, many of my friends did, and I played with them. I speak on these things, even negatively, not from a place of self-made authority, it's from a place of love and a place where I want to see them succeed and see their games succeed, being the very best they can be, even Starfield, especially Starfield. All of those expansion packs made me feel something. Joy, excitement, and hype to turn those games back on. And they made improvements to the games and brought much needed features or expanded and enriched the world in new ways for me, the player. Shattered Space, though, just didn't do any of that, at least not for me. My issue with Shattered Space boils down to a couple of things. I thought the story itself was kind of boring, and I thought Varun Kai, the planet, or, well, moon, it takes place on, I thought that was also equally boring. Visually, Dazra was kind of interesting, but the scaled citadel really disappointed me, and honestly, it felt like I was just paying like an extra $30 or $40 for more base game Starfield. I'm gonna be honest, I felt a little ripped off, and I have never felt that way purchasing a Bethesda expansion or DLC. I will even throw, while I wasn't the biggest fan of workshop DLCs in Fallout 4, even those I was comfortable buying. I didn't feel like I was getting ripped off because I got the fun I thought I needed to get out of them, even if they weren't my personal favorite pieces of content. And now, going back to Starfield, while I enjoy base game Starfield, I didn't want to pay another $40 for another planet that just felt like base game Starfield, but with a purple filter. And maybe I'm being a bit harsh here, but Shattered Space took the really interesting Varun zealots who were kind of full of mystery and made their whole society on Varun Kai look inept, childish, easily confused, and thoroughly unworthy of the world that they sit on. I feel like they aren't even worthy of my dislike, disapproval, or even a second thought from me, because that would be putting them on an undeserved pedestal. Now, with all that in mind and the negative bits out of the way, we can start focusing on the fun stuff. I just hope this paints a picture that I want to see Starfield succeed in its fullest. I just don't think Shattered Space, in my eyes, is an integral part of that success. But before we move forward, let's revisit a previous video I did. In my previous video, 8 Starborn themed DLC ideas for Starfield, I had a few ideas I threw out there. Mostly bare bones, but hopefully enough to get people's brains thinking, and as a result, I had a couple of fun discussions in those comments, and quite recently with people in our Discord server, which you can join, link in the description below. These ideas range from Starborn weapons, more Starborn characters, Starborn specific locations, and a kind of a neat idea for a Starborn Coliseum. Getting to choose your very own Starborn name, and of course, New Game Plus scenarios. There are 2 I really want to focus today, in addition to, I guess, what you might call New Game Plus scenarios. Those being 2 ideas I had in that video, one being the Path of the Hunter and the Path of the Emissary, as well as a brand new Starborn-focused story expansion. Because I think Starfield made a big mistake when ending the game in the Unity. It kind of what I had in mind, like when I was picturing this, was, does anybody remember Fable 3 when they were advertising the game as a story of revolution where you would become the king or queen of Albion? Then, as it kind of got closer to the release, it was revealed that, yes, you become the king or queen of Albion, but that's only the halfway point in the story, and there's a whole different story that comes into play right after. I think Starfield should have had a whole Starborn story that takes place after the Unity, and uncovering the artifacts should have been the first half to that story. But I do think the ideas I'm going to present will bridge this gap and make the multiverse much more exciting for those of us that have ascended to Starborn, as well as some ideas I presented in my previous video. So the first two I'm going to focus on will be expansions of ideas from that video. The first one being the Path of the Emissary. So, okay. Imagine, if you will, stepping into the Unity, as so many of us Starborn have done before. But now, you're given a brief choice before we load into our next universe to choose a different path, to assume a new identity, to choose not just to embody or champion the values of the hunter or emissary, but to become them and play the story from their point of view. The fun thing about Starfield's multiverse to me is the fact that the possibilities are quite endless for ideas of things you can do, but the game sort of locks you in a pattern. Spawn in, hunt artifacts, fight at Buried Temple, go to the Unity, repeat ad nauseum. Let's say on this little menu that pops up, right, you click the Path of the Emissary, and now you spawn into a new universe with the emissary's armor, and you hear your character speaking via the emissary's changed voice, like the generic one they have before their identity is revealed as one of the Constellation Companions, but maybe they'll say something to the effect of, like, time to bring order to this chaos, right, because that's kind of the emissary's shtick. Now, the emissary had their own artifacts in the story as well. We would have to cover the way that they uncovered their artifacts, and honestly, I think that's easily explained. Being a former Constellation member, perhaps they could have some passcode to read Constellation data, files on tracking artifact signatures as Vladimir was tuning the eye to hunt for them, so maybe the emissary's quest is one of sneak and diplomacy. As a Constellation member, perhaps you could go, you could go there outside your armor and try to blend in. Perhaps this universe's version of you left on a mission for Constellation, so they're like surprised to see you there, as they thought you had left on a mission with, insert Constellation companion here. And at that moment, when naming one of those characters, the game itself sets something in stone that we'll come back to later. It'll definitely come into play later. Then, after you gather the artifacts you need, perhaps there's a small time skip or a quick kind of fade to black moment where you come back and hear your character speaking as the emissary say, well, they should be finishing up on Neon soon. Best I head there and confront them. Something like that. Then, at this point, in the Helix, you'll be confronting the Frontier. That's when you speak to this previously mentioned Constellation companion, and that's because this companion is the one taking point for Constellation's adventures, essentially playing the role you did as the main character in your first universe. At this point, it can either be a speech check or via combat, but you convince them to jettison the artifact. But if they get away, it's no issue because you'll be seeing them again real soon, right? After maybe another brief time skip and fade to black moment, perhaps you're in New Atlantis in the aftermath of the Hunter's attack, and you hear the emissary say, time to go meet the Hunter. I hope we're able to reach some accord. Then you jump to the point with the Hunter, you meet on the Scorpius, and perhaps you can chastise them for a little bit. This is perhaps the point where the Hunter will reveal to you as the emissary, the companion they killed at Constellation. And right on cue, shoom, another ship enters the system and is hailed by the Hunter, inviting them on board. Then, this universe's main Constellation character enters, and depending on the character, they will show either a bias to the Hunter, the emissary, or going it alone and kind of forging their own paths independent of both philosophies. Once this exchange continues, or concludes really, you as the emissary tell them to go to the moon. After which, perhaps you can have an exchange with the Hunter and find out what they discussed after Constellation leaves the Scorpius. I leave you all to come up with what they would talk about. Just leave me some ideas in the comments below. Like what conversations would the emissary and the Hunter be having after Constellation leaves? Now, at this point in the Path of the Emissary, we'll reach a critical juncture, because this is where a decision will be made by Constellation. Meeting up with them outside of NASA, they will choose to either support you, the Hunter, or go their own way. I have a list of companions and how I think it would maybe naturally play out. I think the lead companion for Constellation should be, as the Hunter puts it, a random die roll. They would each have their own sympathies based on who's in charge. Barrett, I believe, would be more inclined to side with the Emissary by nature, but this might change if maybe you used violence against them above Neon in the past, or chose dialogue options he disagreed with during the meeting on the Scorpius. Sarah Morgan and Sam Coe, on the other hand, might be more inclined to go it alone, much like a cowboy or diehard explorer would. But assuming you've been more diplomatic with them and chose the right dialogue, you could have the option to do a medium-level speech check to try to convince them to join you and see your side of things. Andreja, though, definitely seems to me she would be more inclined to join or side with the Hunter. Assuming you've been non-violent and diplomatic with her, you might be able to choose the right dialogue options or have a hard-level speech check during that meeting to convince her to join you, even though that may be going against what she believes is the strongest path. Should something happen and no Constellation characters are willing to join either of you, then perhaps you as the Emissary team up with the Hunter to assault the buried temple, and the Guardians there, Athalia, Musa, Fionn, Tuta, and Rin, will contact Constellation to help them defend the final artifact from you, while you both lead an assault on the temple together. Or perhaps you fight the Hunter there on Earth and kill him if you're not willing to team up with him. And then you go to the buried temple by yourself. Now, you make it to the final chapter here, where Constellation has the final artifact. But like the main game, you can either fight them and take it, or be true to the Emissary's nature, and being a former Constellation member yourself, follow a series of speech checks to convince them to give it to you. From there, you can decide to let them into the Unity, since you have all the artifacts, or keep them out. This choice will make a small difference in the Emissary's kind of endgame section here, but it will be meaningful from a role-playing perspective, which I tried to keep in mind when designing all of these, because now we have another time skip. A few months later, maybe a year or so, but we find ourselves aboard a ship in a very remote system, far outside the settled systems themselves, on a ship aptly named the Armillary Station. We're on this ship speaking with another Starborn, perhaps a Constellation companion, or perhaps a brand new character entirely. How about we make him an original character? A Starborn who found themselves in this universe, and as you're kinda coming out of this fade to black moment, he or she tells you that the most recent among the worthy has gone to the Unity to ascend, and this opens up the rest of the ship for you. It doesn't have to be a large or a massive station, but maybe something along the lines of the UC Vigilance, maybe a little bigger. But this ship has a chamber, perhaps, where the armillary is always running, and the massive power demand on that keeps the ship stationary in orbit around a planet, because most of the power is maintaining the portal to the Unity and, the life support functions, just not enough power to run the engines. Now, this may go against what we know about the artifacts needing to power up the grav drive and all that, but there may be an in-universe precedent for this. At least there's a theory of one. It is speculated that Janan Varun accidentally kind of touched the Unity during a grav jump, and he didn't have any artifacts to our knowledge. So it isn't out of the realm of the ordinary to think a specialty-made ship could power the artifacts and open a portal to the Unity. I do think that there are other ways to reach the Unity, and if not, there may be other ways to tap into the power of the artifacts. I see this ship also acting almost as an academy for training future Starborn. Because, as you'll recall, the Emissary wants to guard the artifacts, and they want to decide who's worthy to enter and become a Starborn. If you look at them in kind of the endgame slide, they look like they're almost praying. It takes on almost kind of a religious connotation to it, and that will play into a little bit of what I'm saying in the future. So let's move on to the people populating this ship. The people populating this ship, there would be many Starborn, but also normal humans, and they all function with different roles. Someone acting as the emissary, i.e. your right hand, would be a Starborn known as the Gatekeeper. He or she would kind of act as the ship's captain, who handles all the day-to-day functions and operations of the station, as well as the final step for acolytes of the emissary who wish to become Starborn. Another Starborn would be known as the Teacher. This would be someone instructing the humans on board in the emissary's teachings and philosophy. Should they show a kind but firm nature and willingness to become Starborn with the intention that they will take on similar roles in the future, being either the emissary themselves in another universe, or generally just not a menace on the multiverse. The Teacher would then pass them over to the Gatekeeper for their final questioning before being allowed to possibly enter the Unity. And the Guide would be another Starborn aboard this ship. The Guide would be a Starborn you see occasionally when you make your way back to the Armillary Station. Their job would be to seed clues and information across the galaxy that might encourage the worthy to seek out this portion of space and become one of the emissary's acolytes. That, and to find people worthy of inviting to join the fold. You could possibly get information or radiant quests that this person passes on to the Gatekeeper. There can also be other generic Starborn there, right, serving as security for the ship. They patrol the halls and just kind of keep a watch over things. They can just be, called Starborn Armillary Guardians or Armillary Station Guardians, playing into the Guardian theme that we see in other Starborn. And they could kind of have, interesting dialogue as you walk by them. They'll say things like, "Greetings, emissary. We will protect the armillary for you." Or maybe dialogue about how happy they were to find purpose in this universe, or how they're considering going through the Unity again because they were inspired by your teachings. And certainly, lastly, but not leastly, would be the human acolytes on this ship. These could be humans that were invited or followed the Guide's clues throughout the galaxy. Either way, they're here and under the tutelage of the Teacher. They are learning the necessary skills like STEM skills, but also combat and weapon skills, ship repairs and ship combat, but most importantly, the philosophy of the emissary. They go through this rigorous mental and physical training to prepare them to go into the multiverse and take up these roles for themselves, as either the emissary, the Gatekeeper, the Guide, the Teacher, or even an Armillary Guardian in another universe. Now this works because it kind of gives you an out, so to speak, as the emissary. You don't need to stay and make this your final universe unless you want to. But since you have the framework and the lieutenants in place capable of maintaining it, you can leave this universe via the Unity and go start this journey again should you wish, imposing order on the chaos of the multiverse and seeding more organizations capable of protecting the artifacts and creating responsible Starborn. Should Constellation have sided with you and you manage to build your relationship with them and repair whatever past ills in this universe may have occurred, perhaps this ship and organization is secretly being funded by Walter Stroud. And it would make sense. It would also kind of be funny to have a little quest where you have to go see Walter at the lodge from time to time and maybe deliver energy readings to him that he uses to improve his own starship designs, and then he pays you the money required to kind of fund the little emissary cult. Now, this part only works if you have Constellation side with you and you let them go through the Unity. Now, this path only works if you get Constellation to side with you, and if you let them go through the Unity. So the Lodge in this universe is populated by Vladimir, Noel, Mateo, Walter, and of course, Vasco. And there could be fun dialogue here that they could have to reflect this world state. Perhaps you even hear them offering well wishes among themselves to their companions and even this universe's version of you. I think it would be kind of an interesting and heartwarming thing to see. It could also serve as almost an unofficial snapshot as to how things are going in your original universe. Perhaps even your character is missed as much there as well. Now, should Constellation have become an enemy in this universe, or maybe instead of Walter funding it, it could be funded by Keeper Aquilus and the Sanctum Universum. He could be funding it through the church, and he works with the Guide to seed clues to the Cult of the Emissary. And the Cult of the Emissary kind of serves as the final test for Sanctum Faithful, almost another layer, an upper level to the Sanctum Faith. And this could open up some fun dialogue with Aquilus about how he's helping you out and discussing the creators and the multiverse itself. Perhaps it inspires him to write another volume of his religious text, giving us another book to read. And that brings us very neatly to our next DLC idea, that being the Path of the Hunter. Now, imagine if you will again, you're crossing over the Unity and now you get hit with that same menu and you click instead the Path of the Hunter. You awaken in the Scorpius and in the Hunter's voice you hear something like, "Ah, time to begin another cycle." Now, the Hunter is always a bit of a lone wolf. Perhaps there's only one person the Hunter trusts, and that is the Hunter. To start the Hunter's journey, he would probably first go to the Pilgrim's camp and former settlement. You'd be arriving before Constellation, so you'd leave the Pilgrim's writings there for Constellation to find, but there's also another set of writings there that gets removed before we as Constellation had arrived. These are writings for the Hunter specifically, detailing a web of connections made to track the artifacts. Now, this story assumes much, and I will admit that it does kind of rely a bit on plot conveniences, but so far, to my knowledge, there's nothing contradicting anything I'm about to say. But if there is, let me know in the comment section below. I know, much like the Path of the Emissary, I am relying maybe too much on these plot conveniences, but in this story, it shows how the Hunter prefers to work alone, only kind of relying on himself, or perhaps other versions of himself as the Hunter. Perhaps before a version of the Hunter decides to give up the hunt for the artifacts and settle down in one universe, he does a little footwork and makes some deals knowing another version of himself will eventually come to collect, and leaves writings behind knowing another version of himself will visit the Pilgrim settlement because that is, of course, what he would do. Now, as the Hunter, you would travel to seedy locations, criminal networks in Neon, black market labs on distant moons, and this hunt for the artifacts would take him to Neon first, to meet with a representative of a black market lab that a previous version of the Hunter had funded. But now, this person tries to extort you for cash in order to give you the location. You can choose to pay the money, or you can go the violence or intimidation route. The Hunter is all about expediency, so paying someone off quickly isn't really out of the question, because it's the quicker way to a goal in fighting, assuming you have the credits, of course. And if you don't, well, there's always intimidation checks, and if those don't work, well, I think we know what the Hunter's capable of. Now, you would arrive on this distant planet and moon to meet the people who should have the data on the artifact location. In the time they waited for you, they gathered locations with the gravity anomalies, and they went to visit one recently. One of the people on this journey had found and retrieved an artifact. He glimpsed the Unity, and like so many others, it's driven him a bit mad. Upon his return, he seized control of the place and locked himself up, keeping the men in line with fear and, well, his own insanity. But he has a horde of guys outside, and he yells at you through a speaker, refusing to let you in to steal his prize. Again, you'll have an option here. You can either pass an intimidation check and convince the guards outside to run away and leave you the key, or you just gun them down and take the key to get in. Once inside, this can be a standard fare shooting gallery that Bethesda likes in these games. Somewhere, you as the Hunter can really let loose, going guns blazing and unleashing the full array of your Starborn powers. After mowing them all down, you can enter the room where this guy and his strongest guards are. Again, you have the option to intimidate and scare the guards into leaving, but if not, well, then you better prepare for a tough fight. Upon defeating him, you can pick up his artifact. Holding it in your hands, you'd hear in the Hunter's voice like, "Ah, feels good to be back." And from there, you could pilfer the base for loot and all the usual gubbins. From there, you'll get data on the locations for the other artifacts and acquire them in the normal way we do. Landing, mining, fighting local wildlife, spacers, Crimson Fleet, all the usual suspects. But upon completing this hunt for the artifacts, it's time for the Hunter's big debut on the main quest stage. It's time for you to attack the Eye, and this is where you could make a choice. This choice will decide who is the emissary in this playthrough, obviously, but also lock in whoever the lead Constellation member is. Very similar to what we discussed in the Path of the Emissary, this is how the game can decide what will be going on in later interactions, because after you beat Constellation on the Eye, you can choose to kill one of them, and if you choose none, then you'll have the option to kill someone at the lodge. This can become a point of contention between you and Constellation moving forward. But I also propose an idea for another path. You as the hunter could choose not to kill a Constellation companion, and this could be your way of kind of switching things up a bit, because the hunter's always looking for new experiences. But this may also give you the edge when negotiating with Constellation later outside of NASA. Perhaps you can use that as a point to add to the hunter's pragmatism argument. This is where the game will play out similar to the Emissary story for the rest of it. Meeting on the Scorpius, then NASA, then you try to convince Constellation to side with you. And in this case, Andreja would be more inclined to side with the hunter, should she be the lead Constellation companion. Barrett would prefer the Emissary, and Sarah and Sam would prefer to go it alone. The only difference could be if you choose to kill a Constellation member, your speech checks to get them on your side, even Andreja, who might have been more inclined to join you, would be quite difficult. But, if not, perhaps their stance on you may soften. Sure, they wouldn't fully trust you, but they might be willing to assist you in gaining the last artifact. Now, I don't have much of an afterwards for the final quest here, not like I did with the Path of the Emissary, because the hunter isn't one to stick around long after getting the artifacts. His whole thing is that he wants to get to the Unity as quickly as possible. But perhaps once you have the artifact, you can keep your word to Constellation, or maybe you're forced to put them down and go by yourself. Both of these paths I think would be interesting and make very fun and fantastic story expansions for Starborn characters, to experience the multiverse in a new way. And I think both work because in the great expanse, the great infinite expanse of the multiverse, who's to say there isn't a version of you out there who has assumed these identities, right? And is wreaking havoc across the multiverse or imposing order as they see fit. I don't think it's too out of the realm of the ordinary to assume that there is a version of the hunter out there that is you or your character or another Constellation character, nor do I think it's out of the ordinary that your character would assume the role of the Emissary in another universe. And now that brings us into the next story I have, and this one is going to be a bit beefier than the others, so you're going to have to bear with me. It's a long one, but I'm calling this one The Fallen Creator. And kind of the setup to this story is, since it's one of the more ambitious ones I have, perhaps you're going through the Unity and now you select this option instead of the Path of the Hunter or the Path of the Emissary. I've dubbed it, as I said, The Fallen Creator. And instead of appearing in a new universe and a Starborn Guardian as we're all accustomed to, perhaps you awaken in a different place. A place that doesn't feel or look like anywhere we've ever been before. This is clearly a place beyond space and time, completely outside the physical universes we've come to know. A place that feels like the Unity and is clearly of direct creator origin. Now, moving forward, I may be a bit more vague here, and I apologize. I'm being more vague than I would care to, only because we don't have a ton of information on the creators, but perhaps as we continue on, we can create some fun ideas as we go forward. In this situation, I see your character being whisked away, and you meet one of the creators. This being would explain to you where you are and why you're here, because you have traveled the multiverse, engaged in many battles and trials, and for better or worse, you've proven you can get the job done and fight like hell when needed. And fighting like hell doesn't always need to mean combat either. The battle with words is just as important. So this would be kind of a fun way for them to kind of randomly mention whichever stats you have the highest or maxed out. A few examples could be something like this being telling you, for what's to come, somebody with your knowledge and skill at firearms will be most necessary. For people with different firearm skills like pistols, lasers, snipers, whatever. Or your proficiency in close quarters combat might come in more in handy than you think for what's to come, if you happen to be a melee or hand-to-hand combatant. Or the battle with words is just as important as the battle with blades and guns. A silver-tongued Starborn may be exactly what we need right now, if you're a diplomacy and speech type. Or your knowledge of piloting ships and ship systems will be the key to battles to come. A crew would benefit from having you at their helm. For the pilots and Starborn who have high levels in different ship skills. Now, anyway, I think 4 examples are enough there, but you get what I'm saying. Nice little flavor dialogue to help lead into the greater mystery or conflict, because, oh boy, is there some conflict going on in this story. In this story, I see us learning a lot about the creators. Perhaps each one of them is assigned to watch over a universe. Perhaps similar to the philosophies of the Emissary, they see each universe as precious and must be protected. But also, similar to the Hunter, they think the humans should be allowed to do whatever they see fit. The creators act to maintain the physical reality itself, not the moral integrity of its inhabitants. In this story, some creators are starting to get directly involved in their universes, actively trying to subjugate them. But this isn't something they can just do by snapping their fingers or even blinking everyone out of existence. Perhaps one of the first things they have to do is cut a universe off from the Unity. But by the time you're recruited, this hasn't exactly happened yet in the specific universe you're being sent to. Now imagine, if you will, other Starborn have been recruited too. Starborn versions of all kinds of characters. You'd see the usual suspects, the Hunter, the Emissary, the various Guardians that we meet in the Buried Temple, Athalia, Tuda, Rin, Fionn, and Musa, but also Starborn versions of our Constellation companions, even perhaps maybe Starborn versions of Walter, Mateo, and Noel. I'm not entirely sold on the idea of those three yet, but there are examples, or at least one example, of a Starborn version of Walter, which you hear tell of in a New Game Plus scenario. So it's not out of the ordinary, I just don't really have anything that I can think of using them in. But this is where we can learn about everyone's specific journeys to the Unity in their original universe. And suffice to say, a creator kind of going rogue and wanting to subjugate or destroy a universe, I mean, this is an Avengers level threat, let's be honest. So maybe the creators are assembling the very best Starborn in the multiverse, or they just recruit Starborn in the multiverse to fight in this war. And I think it would be fun to see other Starborn being recruited as well. Starborn versions of characters we've possibly even met before, Captain Petrov or Hadrian. It would be interesting to see how they came to join the ranks of the Starborn, and you could learn about their specific journeys to the Unity. Now, this may be a bit of sidetracking, and I apologize. That's just purely me wanting to see more than maybe the same 5 or 6 Starborn over and over and over. But which Starborn you see on your side should be RNG, but it should also affect which Starborn you see fighting on the other side, which moves us neatly into the story section of this. Like I said, perhaps the creators have been fighting each other since the beginning, fighting to corrupt, destroy, or save certain universes. And at one point, the Unity was open to humans, and thus the Starborn program was created. Perhaps the purpose of the Starborn was to create soldiers powerful and morally flexible enough to fight in this war to save universes whenever it should be needed. But considering there are so many Starborn and Starborn versions of you and all the others, nearly an infinite number, the odds of Starborn being chosen or even getting involved accidentally in this conflict is pretty slim to none. Only when they show great prowess are they selected. But in this story, you need people to fight against. Perhaps this fallen creator and others of their ilk, in their path to subjugate this universe and to kind of just fully control and dominate it, they have drawn Starborn to their side. Starborn that they've promised to maybe serve as their mortal representatives in the settled systems once they conquer it. And we can call these Starborn the Dark Starborn. I know that isn't a great name, but bear with me here, because I think these Dark Starborn could be carrying some very cool, corrupted versions of Starborn powers. But to match, those characters who are aligned with the quote-unquote good creators will be granted new Starborn powers as well. This can also tie into my idea from the previous video about a Starborn arsenal, because we do need Starborn weapons, rifles, pistols, shotguns, swords, clubs, snipers, whatever. We need it. And we need it now. Now that I have some of the very bare bones lore and setup out of the way, let's talk about how this could be an alternate main quest for this specific universe, but one that still kind of offers that ray of hope with the Unity at the end. Instead of the hunt for the artifacts, perhaps by the time you get there and recruit the Starborn you wish to have for your companions, different parts of the settled systems are already facing their own losing battles against the fallen creator and their Dark Starborn. Your job could be breaking blockades in space surrounding Jemison, Mars, Aquila, and Voli Alpha. then having to move to the ground battle in New Atlantis, Sidonia, Aquila City, and Neon. After you liberate these planets, it could be about unifying the big factions and pushing for a final battle against the Dark Starborn and their fallen creator. Think something like Mass Effect 3, right? So you would save New Atlantis, then you would have to speak to President Abeyo, and she would perhaps be willing to ally and join a fleet with the Freestar Collective, but lo and behold, the materials they need to outfit their ships are in Sidonia, and Sidonia is also under attack, so you have to liberate Sidonia. And oh, well now they can't contact the Freestar Collective because Aquila City and Neon, in their planets respectively, Aquila and Voli Alpha, are under siege. And this can happen in whatever, you can do these in whatever order you want, but functionally the outcome is still the same. Trying to get the Freestar Collective and the United Colonies to ally into one fleet to help you defeat the fallen creator and the Dark Starborn. And of course, both sides would have their own named Starborn characters, as well as generic Starborn on each side to kind of give a sense of scale. But before I dive more into that, let's really dive into our cast of characters instead, because I think this cast of characters can be pretty big. Now, we will have Starborn favorites like the Hunter and Emissary respectively, Sarah Morgan, Samco, Barrett, Andrasia, Athalia, Tuta, Rin, Musa, and Fion. Perhaps the Emissary will just use the generic Emissary voice they have before you find out they're a Constellation companion to keep this story from having, say, 2 Sams or 2 Barretts or 2 versions of you. I think this would be a great way to give Athalia, Tuta, Rin, Musa, and Fion some much-needed characterization, because those characters all serve kind of as our final boss characters, or maybe lieutenant final bosses of the main Hunt for the Artifact story, but we know very little about them. Now, I'm sure this is intentional to keep the Starborn as mysterious and enigmatic as possible, but for new players, I think the mystery would still be intact in the main game, but for those of us that have been around the settled systems and the multiverse for a while, this could be some much-needed new lore and answered questions. I think there's already some hints to characters' identities, but I think maybe these can be expanded on, and I'll try to come up with endings for each one, so stick around for that. But let's start with Athalia. We know Athalia focuses a lot on the resurrection powers. When you fight her, she's always bringing those dead ecliptic mercenaries back to life. But perhaps the focus of her resurrection power stems from the fact that she lost a husband she loved deeply, and searched the far reaches of the settled systems in her original universe for the power to save him or bring him back, and that was how she came across the artifacts, and now she's on a quest to find a universe where he lives and she can still be with him. A universe where he didn't pass away from, let's just call it an illness that they didn't catch in time. And this has the potential to kind of be a pretty dark and sad story. Perhaps in the midst of this story, if you have Athalia as a companion, you would get to know her, and you could have a companion quest where she wants you to join her in looking for her husband on New Atlantis. But you find him, and you find out that he's married to this universe's version of her. And Athalia wants you to help her, well, dispatch herself so she can take her place as this man's wife. Or you can try to convince her to let go and just, let nature take its course and let them live their lives without her interference. Or you can convince her to make contact with them and share her story, letting them know that he has an illness that needs to be treated before it becomes a problem. And that could mean this version of Athalia in this universe doesn't lose her husband. This choice could be the catalyst for Athalia leaving this universe to possibly continue on to find a version of her husband that she can be with, or to retire and settle down in the next universe. Now, Fion, moving on to him now, I think is a pretty fun one, because if my memory serves correctly, and I may be wrong, let me know, but I think, doesn't he use a Varun Pain Blade for a weapon? I think Fion, being a follower of the Varun faith, would be really fun, but not just any follower, a House Meline zealot. Fion came across the artifacts because of Andresia in his original universe. Thinking they may be holy artifacts, he attacked and stole them from Constellation and ascended to join the multiverse. He sees traveling the multiverse as a holy act in the name of the Great Serpent, so his religious fervor fuels all versions of him running around. I'm not sure what kind of quest or struggle he would be going through that we as the player could influence, but if you have any ideas, let me know below. I will still have maybe what you might call an ending slide for this character. Now, Rin and Tuta might be a bit more difficult, but there's some things that, admittedly, I'm reaching, but we can extrapolate on. For one, when we see them, they're always together in a room full to bursting with turrets and robots. Perhaps in their past lives they were explorers and roboticists, but also the very best of friends. We know when a person goes through the Unity with other people, you all get spit out in different universes. You don't just arrive in a new universe with the same people. And I'm not going to imply that they did either, but perhaps they found each other again in each universe. They had an agreement, right? Like, if we're going to do this, let's meet on the other side at this day at this time. And perhaps they found each other again in each universe as a result of that. Perhaps all versions of them made this deal, so they've always had a meetup date and time, which is how they've kind of always been together. Not saying they're getting spit out in the same universe. It may not be the very same version of their best friend from the previous universe, but that's only made their bond all the stronger. Knowing that so far, at least, each version of the other they've encountered has still been their very best friend that they've always known and loved. Though should the RNG spawn them to join you in this DLC, perhaps they could be maybe not having a crisis, but a disagreement between them. Maybe not a space-shattering one. Oh god, that was terrible. Shattered space joke. Anyway, maybe not a space-shattering one, but perhaps Rin wants to stop all the universe hopping and finally settle down, and Tuta wants to finish this mission and continue on in the Unity. Rin might be sad at the idea of their friend leaving, since their meetup date has passed, and it's likely if Rin stays in this universe, they won't see them or another version of them again. Whereas Tuta would find another version of Rin, and you could focus on encouraging them to go through the Unity together, settle down in this universe together, or drive a wedge between them and force them apart. Musa, moving on to Musa, is a Starborn I don't have anything on. I was racking my brain trying to come up with a story for this character, but I got nothing. I mean, Musa uses all kinds of different weapons when you fight them, multiple different weapon types, so perhaps they were like a skilled soldier or an assassin. I would enjoy hearing your thoughts. The name is similar to Mansa Musa. Perhaps he was really wealthy in his previous universe, and he tapped into the Unity as like an ultra-rich guy experiment. I don't know. But now this is where we delve into characters that we already know, and we can get a sense of how the multiverse has been treating them. Now, it's safe to assume moving forward, at some point, each of these Constellation companions probably did a few universes as the Emissary, as we have, should we have chosen the Path of the Emissary. Sarah, I think, having been to multiple universes, her conflict in the story might be she's losing her zeal for exploration. Having been through the Unity multiple times, you may find yourself, sympathizing with her. But your role in this could be convincing her to finally retire, maybe get a little slice of land on Paradiso, or re-inflame her passion and convince her to chart her way through another universe. Moving on to Barrett, Barrett's been going to universes and studying the science of being Starborn and sharing his discovery in scientific communities across the multiverse, but saving the very best secrets for Constellation. I think his conflict can revolve around him maybe not finding as many answers as he would like, so he's becoming a bit too obsessed with discovering more of the science behind the Starborn and the artifacts, possibly being on the verge of becoming a quote-unquote mad scientist type of character. And you can push him to embrace a science-at-all-cost mindset, or to temper himself, convincing him to remember himself in hopes he will return to his normally goofy, but still scientifically ethical self. Moving on to Andrasia, I think she would be having a crisis of faith, almost the exact opposite of what we had stated earlier for Fionn. Whereas the multiverse has strengthened Fionn's faith, Andrasia has become a bit shattered. Oh, there's that joke again. Get it? Shattered space? My God. It wasn't funny the first time. I don't know why I wrote it in here a second time. But anyway, interactions with Andrasia could include either convincing her to embrace her faith and convincing her that she is on the right path, or to renounce it. Now, this one is a little tough here, but I think Sam Coe's story should be a bit darker. When he arrives on the other end of the Unity without his daughter, because remember, Cora Coe is always with him, and she goes through the Unity too, and we all arrive in different universes, not together. So I think he's probably fallen into kind of a deep depression, feeling like he failed her and he's just terrified for her safety. While we don't see this fear in the Emissary if they happen to be Sam, we can explore it here because it ties into another character I was kind of keeping secret. Moving on to what I would consider the last of the more plot-significant Starborn in this story, we have the adult version of Cora Coe. This version could have a tie-in story with Sam if they both happen to be on your side of the conflict. She, being the older woman who lost her father, or as the young girl who went through the Unity and came out the other side alone, having grown up now. Both have compelling stories, and perhaps we could randomize them. Perhaps this version of Cora, like if we say this is the Cora that lost Sam to the Hunter, she could be trying to reconnect with him now that she's older and has a Starborn version of him back. But he's not willing to because he doesn't actually see her as his daughter, just like a cheap copy, right? And if it's a version of Cora that went through the Unity and emerged alone, perhaps she could be mad and resentful at Sam, and he could be wanting to reconnect with her. Should the RNG favor you and you have these two on your side, you could focus on either dividing them further or convincing them to kind of reconcile their differences and reconnect, which could have some really fun implications at the end of the story. Next up, we have the Emissary, but again, a non-constellation companion. I'm thinking the Emissary will use that generic voice before we find their identity. I'd like to see this version of the Emissary despairing, right? Finding out the creators fight amongst each other. But overall, as we work towards galactic cooperation with the factions, they can kind of start to be pulled from this rut because perhaps in their mind they see their ideals reflected, albeit loosely, in the ideals of the fallen creator, that being the semblance of control, which will play into a topic I'll discuss later on in the video. But this would also be a fun way to explore how things were in their original universe if they choose to give them, say, the identity of a constellation companion. And we could also talk about how our character's death affected them and what that relationship was there. And lastly, the main Starborn. We all know we have the man, the myth, the legend, unanimously the favorite character in Starfield by a wide margin, and that is the Hunter. I propose there could be two different versions of the Hunter, depending on the RNG, whichever one joins you, right? One could be the Hunter that we all know and love, the aggressive Hunter who never backs down and relishes in a tough fight. But I also propose a different version of the Hunter. If you're able to convince the Hunter to back down at the buried temple, he makes a comment about how he hasn't, felt this old in a long time. Maybe we could be dealing with that Hunter, one that is moving on to kind of his Keeper Aquilus phase, and is maybe tired at the fact that he's being dragged into a new conflict. Even if a few cycles ago he would have relished this fight and relished the idea of something new happening in the multiverse, but now he's just dreading all the death and destruction. And if there are Constellation Starborn here, they could definitely have ship banter with the Hunter on the ship where they argue and berate him, and they could have some really interesting dialogue here because they have suffered and lost friends and loved ones at his hands. And now he's all of a sudden that version that's not interested in conflict anymore. I think it would be interesting, and it could show a softer side to the regularly harsh philosophy of the hunter. Maybe he could even be apologetic to them, and maybe we could even learn about his time on Earth, and perhaps he could reveal his identity before he became the hunter and later Keeper Aquilus. Maybe that theory about the hunter being Victor Isa would be true. Now, the conflict he's facing could be either we encourage the hunter to go through the Unity and maybe finally retire and start the Sanctum, or just encourage him to embrace the hunter side of himself, which will inevitably lead him down the path of the hunter that he has walked so many times before, or to just abandon it all and go live out the rest of his life in the fringes of this universe after the battle. And just for fun, I'm throwing a bit of a wild card Starborn in here, which is Petrov. I think he would be known as maybe the Collector. Should he be on our side or the Fallen Creator's side? I don't know. I'll leave that for you to decide, but somehow I love the idea of the Scow serving as the main flagship of the Fallen Creators' forces, or maybe even as the flagship of our forces, like a mobile HQ. But I think it would be cool, like, if there was a battle where you had to destroy the Starborn Guardian escorts of the ship, disable the ship, and then, kind of break into it and find some items or maybe cripple a major fleet for the Fallen Creator. That would be pretty fun, and then you could have a conversation with Petrov, maybe learning about his path to the Unity and if your paths crossed in his original universe. Unless, of course, he is on your side, then you can get all that information and just conversation with him, because I think his ship serving as a mobile HQ for our ragtag group of Starborn would actually be pretty cool. But again, that's just my opinion on that. Now, moving on, we have another exploration of these characters, but this is for versions of them that have maybe sided with the Fallen Creator. I know this seems like a lot here because I'm discussing the possibility of multiple characters appearing as either protagonists with you or antagonists against you joining the Fallen Creator. And every single time, that's a random die roll. Which ones join you, which ones join the Fallen Creator. But bear with me, because even if it's bare bones, fill in the details that you want with your own imagination and leave them in the comments below. But let's take a look at some of these characters and reasons they may want to join the Fallen Creator. The Emissary could be convinced to join because the Fallen Creator has promised them the artifacts to watch over in this universe. The Emissary, as we know, is a little bit about control. Maybe not in an authoritarian sense, but still. This could be a very new way to guard and maintain the artifacts for their own ends, so I don't think it's a far stretch to have them join this Fallen Creator. The next few will be a bit quicker. Perhaps Athalia may join the Fallen Creator because he promises to bring her husband back and allow him to rule by her side on one of these planets after they conquer this universe together. And Fion could be an easy one. Perhaps the Fallen Creator is presenting themselves as the Great Serpent, so he believes he's on a holy crusade. Rin and Tuta perhaps join the Fallen Creator because despite all their adventures across the multiverse together, they've never actually participated in a conflict on a galactic scale, and they want to stay and help rule over this universe. The promise of power for these two specific versions of them was just too good to pass up, and they would be possibly providing robotic support to the Fallen Creator's Dark Starborn army. Musa, again, I got nothing there. Drop your own ideas below. Sarah is a bit of a tough one, because obviously I'd see her joining, say, the good creators, right? The good side of the conflict we as the player would be siding on. And the Fallen Creator, I just don't know. But since we have an infinite expanse of multiverse and situations that can happen, let's just try one out. This specific Sarah has been hardened by her experiences and never got resolution on Cassiopeia. In her original universe, maybe all of Constellation, except her, got killed by the Hunter. And this Sarah has been a scourge on the multiverse ever since, just killing and doing whatever she can to ascend through the Unity over and over and over. This could be a version of Sarah Morgan, kind of in her Hunter era. Barrett, I had an easier time with, because Barrett is a scientist, right? So maybe he's been promised the idea of new sciences to study, a way to study the nature of the Starborn and the Unity and not being bound by ethics. This would definitely be mad scientist Barrett, taken to the extreme. So, maybe he's also looking for a way to bring back Irving, not so dissimilar from Athalia's story. That could probably play into it, but I think I would rather just go with a mad scientist Barrett, and this war is providing him no shortage of Starborn that he can study. Now, Sam, I think, a bit of an easy one, actually. Perhaps the Fallen Creator promises to unite this specific Sam with his original Korra. This Sam has been traveling the multiverse in despair looking for his little girl, and he believes this is how he's finally going to get her back, by helping this Fallen Creator dominate this universe. Andreja, we can use a similar excuse like we used for Fionn. Perhaps this Andreja could be like the one we encounter in the New Game Plus scenario, where she's with the Varun Zealots, but instead of us defeating her, she defeats us. She thought the artifacts were blasphemy, but was ordered by the Varun Council to find them and use them, and she's helped House Varun start multiple Serpent's Crusades in other universes. And now this Andreja is under the belief that this fallen creator is indeed the Great Serpent, so that is why she's joined up with them. She sees this as an extension of the Serpent's Crusade she has led in other universes. And Korra could be joining them. Maybe she wants her father back, very similar to how Sam wants his daughter back. Or this is the version where she lost her father to the Hunter, and she's just going through the multiverse just causing chaos and havoc because she's just reaping a bloody toll because of what was taken from her. This is a Korra, right, who is also, in her Hunter era, despite having lost her father to him. She kind of becomes the thing that made her the way she is. Now, I know that was a lot there, but I bring it up because if you have it to where there's all these different characters and they can either be, at the roll of a dice, antagonistic characters or protagonists with you. I know the jumble there can be quite a bit, but the ship dialogue would be so fantastic, and it would add so much replayability to this DLC. So after you go through the Unity, you want to try it again, like, oh, who am I going to side with this time? Who am I going to end up fighting this time? And I think that to me would be the very bee's knees, and that would be a very true expression of the nature of Starfield's multiverse. And I really think that the Sam, Korra, or even like a Korra and Hunter story would be among my favorites, because there could be so much interaction. Like if Sam lost Korra in the Unity, or Korra lost Sam to the Hunter, and now the Hunter is on their team and they just cannot get along. I think the ship dialogue there would be just freaking awesome. Returning to this expansion, I think there would be 4 planets I mentioned earlier, right? Jemison, Mars, Aquila, and Volii Alpha. Each planet would have battles in 2 phases. A space battle where you would bring your own Starborn Guardian, or maybe you'd have the Scow in support if Petrov is on your side, and you'd have to engage in 2 battles being led separately by randomly assigned Starborn. One leading the space assault, and the other one leading the ground attack on each planet. Each one, you destroy or board their assault ship, and after its escorts are done, you would assist the UC and Freestar fleets, respectively, mopping up the fleets around there. After doing so, you'd meet with the planet's leadership and hopefully convince them to kind of come to your peace summit. Now, also, once you've done all that and kind of freed the planets from their blockades, the politicians and the NPCs would kind of hash out the deals in the background of what they need to do, while you find where the Fallen Creator and the Dark Starborn have their main base. There would be a series of other quests kind of leading to that you and your Starborn companions would be going on. And then finally, you assault them. The space battle would be consisting of all kinds of people. Freestar Rangers and their Star Eagles, Vanguard pilots, and maybe even the UC Vigilance under the command of Commander Ikande would show up. And of course, the other Starborn on your side who've come to help in this assault. Now, after you lead the ground assault with the other NPCs teaming up, and pick your companions to go out, you'd finally maybe defeat this fallen creator or weaken them enough for the other creators to destroy them. I can't give specifics here because I'm not sure how one kills celestial deity-like figures in the Starborn universe, at least maybe not without having a Mortis dagger. Comment down below if you get that reference. Again, I know this is a very bare bones idea, but choosing to maybe stay in this universe and making it your final one would open up much different dialogue with the faction quest lines, because chances are you would have seen some of these people in your quest to unite the galaxy to take on the fallen creator. And the state of the galaxy could reflect that, like perhaps Ambassador Radcliffe being more amenable to helping the UC during the Vanguard questline, and that would reflect the more positive relations that they built during that alternate main quest to fight the fallen creator. I would definitely enjoy some Radiant Quest 2 to hunt down the remnants of the Dark Starborn still hanging out throughout the universe, and these could be quests that would be given to you by either the Vanguard or the Freestar Rangers. This would be a very fun, in-universe way to explore, and in the end, there would be a tone of optimism and cooperation. I think the endings in the Unity should reflect that too. And upcoming next, I'll cover some of the endings for this DLC to wrap up our video. I'll try to give you as many different, I guess what you might call ending slides or sections per character as I can, but some may have less than others as I'm just kind of writing this and coming up with them as I go along. As a side note, Bethesda, you need to add DLC endings to the Unity. I'm not sure how you crafted the ending to Shattered Space and gave it the stakes that you did, and then just thought that nobody would want to see those choices mentioned during our time in the Unity. It actually caught me off guard when I made it to the Unity and it wasn't mentioned, but I was caught off guard in a very disappointed way. And moving on to the endings now. So, for this part, I really just want to have what you might call a main ending outside of the faction quest endings you see in the Unity. I think those should be changed slightly to reflect this new galactic state in this story. But that's a writing challenge I really don't feel like tackling, at least the factions. So this would be like the ending you'd hear for like the main ending to this story in the Unity. It's meant to supplant what might be the kind of constellation section of the ending where it talks about Noel, Vladimir, and all them kind of publishing a paper and you know, all that jazz. It would go as follows. You and the Starborn, having defeated the fallen creator with the help of the galaxy's faction, ushered in an era of unprecedented cooperation between the United Colonies and Freestar Collective. In time, the sins of the colony war would have been forgiven, but not forgotten, and both factions would look to a brighter and more cooperative future. The people of the settled systems would look to the Starborn who stayed behind with reverence, seeing them as guardians of the universe, and others seeing them as angelic figures. No matter what, all agreed that this optimistic future wouldn't have been possible without them. And I think that kind of goes to not take sides on what might be considered the quote-unquote like scientific ending, right? Or the more religious ending that you see taken with people like Sanctum Universum, like how Aquilus is Starborn, but also he's quite a religious figure and man of faith. And moving on now, we're going to go into like our different character endings based on some of the stories and conflicts we had theorized about earlier in the video. So, starting with Guardian Athalia, we have a few separate endings. First one is if you don't help her supplant herself in that universe and just kind of maybe ignored her or didn't do her quest. And just for the record, I'm kind of narrating these from the perspective of the version of ourselves we see in the Unity, perhaps being the Unity itself speaking to us. So just know when I'm like narrating these endings, this is just how I see them in my head from my character speaking to me or from your character speaking to you when you go through. Athalia, after the battle with the fallen creator, went to New Atlantis to track down the man who was her husband in another universe, only to find he was married to this universe's version of her. Enraged, Athalia opened fire on them, sparking an intense gunfight with UC security. In the confusion, many ended up dead, including her husband, thereby tainting the image of the Starborn in this universe. She would leave this universe and be reborn, with a new rage in her heart. She will bring great violence to the multiverse after leaving this universe's version of Athalia widowed once more. Pretty gnarly, I know. Now this ending is if you helped her dispose of herself and replace herself in this universe. After the battle with the fallen creator, Athalia's ruse took full root. Returning to New Atlantis, she was able to convince her husband to seek treatment for his illness before it became a problem. They were happy for a time, but he noticed she was different and couldn't quite understand why. When he would press her on this topic, she would reveal her Starborn nature to him, and out of some twisted sense of romanticism, she would explain what she had done. Horrified by this, he would leave her and cut all contact. This would cause Athalia great anguish. She would choose to be reborn into a new universe, continuing her desperate mission. Now, this is if you convince her to maybe let go and possibly settle down in this universe or the next, and there will be like 2 variations of this ending slide. After you convinced Athalia to let go and let nature take its course, she would settle down in this universe on the fringes of space, living an isolated life for the rest of her days, her only company being the occasional supply shuttle. And the second one for this would be something like, after you convinced Athalia to let nature and life take its course, Athalia would choose to be reborn, freeing herself from her mission. She would settle down in the next universe and live out the rest of her days knowing that even if she couldn't save or be with her husband again, she could build a new life with a new meaning, far away from the old pain and old memories. And this ending is where maybe she would like reveal herself to a non-Starborn version of Athalia and her husband, convincing them to seek treatment for this illness. Athalia, showing a compassion she had thought dimmed during her time in the multiverse, would save the life of this universe's version of her husband, thereby sparing this Athalia of her pain. Finally feeling like her mission is complete, she would be reborn in the Unity, and in her next universe, she would change her name and become a prominent doctor, focusing on treating late-stage diseases. I actually really like all the variations and endings we have for Athalia here, based on kind of the story I had crafted for her. I think they reflect the kind of almost like insanely chaotic nature that we as Starborn have. It really makes the character, in theory, all that she could be to me. Now, Fion here, I don't have much in the way of conflicts this character is facing, because I've made him a member of House Varun, and I didn't want to tread or retread ground we could use for Andrasia. Instead, I have an ending slide for him regardless. It's just not very, let's call it, varied. Fion, resolute as ever in his faith, rejoices at destroying the fallen creator and the part he played in it. Grateful to have executed what he saw in good faith as the great serpent's will, he chooses to be reborn in another universe, continuing his campaigns of faith for the great serpent and his service to the High Council of Varun Kai, inspiring many Varun people to try and become Starborn as well. Now we have some endings here for Rin and Tuta, who, as we discussed earlier, have 3 options: leaving this universe, settling down, or driving a wedge between them, with one staying and one leaving. Let's start with, quote-unquote, the bad ending, where you kind of drive a wedge between them. Your interference in Rin and Tuta's relationship drove them to part on unfriendly terms. Rin would stay in this universe and lament the departure of their friend for a very long time, wondering if there was something else they could have done to salvage this friendship. This is something that would cause Rin to push other people away who they might have been able to call friend in this universe. These people would never know that Rin was one of the Starborn who fought to protect them and their universe. Tuta, on the other hand, upset with Rin, would be reborn into another universe and shun the meeting date and time with a new Rin. And this would lead Tuta to a new path in the multiverse, one of great loneliness and anger, and many others that crossed Tuta's path would pay the price as a result. Now, this coming ending is if you convince them both to continue their travels throughout the multiverse. Rin and Tuta, being reborn again as they had countless times before, continued their tradition of meeting up with one another at the same time and the same place. They would each share their individual stories and tales of differences between the new versions of each other each time, but as always, for good or ill, they would continue their adventures and conflicts throughout the universe, never staying too far away from trouble. And this is the ending if you convince them both to settle down and make this their last universe. In the days following the final battle against the fallen creator, Rin and Tuta would settle down in this universe. Being a well-known Starborn, Rin would get a position working as a lead engineer in a robotics engineering facility, and Tuta would aid the UC and Freestar forces, continuing the fight with the remnants of the Dark Starborn for years to come. Over time, they would build a circle of friends from Rin's robotic facility and Tuta's military friends. This group of friends would build lifelong bonds and share stories of their lives. The group's favorites always being tales of Rin and Tuta's days traveling the multiverse together. Now, I don't have one for Musa here, but I will say I do kind of like the Rin and Tuda story, that no matter how many times they get separated, they always find a new version of each other, and it's just like all versions of them are just best friends. I think that's kind of fun. I think that's kind of neat, and I think it kind of gives an interesting take on the Starborn with everyone being separated. But moving back on to Musa here, I don't have one for Musa, but please drop down in the comments and flesh out Musa if you're kind of enjoying these ideas so far. Give him a background, a conflict to face in the story, a reason to join the Fallen Creator should the RNG put him on that side, and maybe ending slides to reflect your ideas. I'd love to read them and respond in great detail, which I do try to do for most comments. Now, moving on to our Constellation Companion, starting with Sarah Morgan. As we've discussed earlier, Sarah's having a crisis, losing her passion for exploration after hopping the multiverse so many times. So we have two ending slide options for her here to reflect convincing her to settle down or continue on. Your words relit Sarah Morgan's passion for exploration. After the battle with the Fallen Creator, she would be reborn into another universe, charting horizons both new and old, and remembering all over again why she fell in love with the infinite expanse of the Starfield. Ho ho ho! I knew I'd get the name in there somehow. I can hear my buddy Angel just snapping his fingers going, He said the thing! Now, let's look at an ending slide if you convince Sarah to retire and make this her last universe. Your words took root in Sarah Morgan's heart. After the battle with the Fallen Creator, Sarah Morgan would retire to Paradiso. After a life well lived in her original universe and countless lives in others, she reveled in the idea of no longer chasing the next horizon. She would spend her days enjoying the beach, the sunshine, and speaking in conferences on exploration across the settled systems, always returning to her small home in Paradiso. Now, moving on to Barrett, these ending slides will deal with either encouraging him as a mad scientist or convincing him to return to his more ethical roots. This one covering the first possibility. Barrett, inspired by your words, vowed that he would continue his work on understanding the nature and science behind the Starborn. After the battle with the Fallen Creator, Barrett would present his findings behind the science of the Starborn and the nature of the Unity. This would cause some questions to be raised in the scientific community, and later the authorities, about Barrett's methods. Barrett would retreat to the far reaches of the galaxy to continue his research, but setbacks and issues with the factions of the galaxy eventually caused Barrett to seek out the Unity and be reborn, continuing his experiments on the Starborn in other universes, earning him a sinister reputation across the multiverse. And now this one deals with convincing Barrett to do his research by more ethical means. Barrett, tempered by your words, vowed to continue his work into understanding the Starborn and the nature of the Unity by ethical means. After the battle with the Fallen Creator, Barrett would work with some of the greatest scientific minds, both human and Starborn, to find why the Starborn are the way they are. This would lead to many advances in medicine and technology that would go on to benefit this universe for many generations. And next up, we have a couple of ending slides for Andreja, depicting if you convinced her to renounce her faith to the Great Serpent or embrace it and continue on. The first one that we're about to cover here will reflect renouncing her faith. Andreja is convinced that her entire faith in the Great Serpent was a lie. After the battle with the Fallen Creator, she would find many Varun dissidents and exiles in this universe and lead them on a campaign of destruction, eventually destroying the city of Dazra in a prolonged siege and ground war. Andreja would eventually choose to be reborn into another universe, and vowed that no version of Varun Kai or the House Varun faith would be safe while this version of her traveled the multiverse. That's a pretty intense ending, but it's pretty fun. It's like fun to kind of imagine a Varun Kai ground war being led by Andreja. And the next one follows an Andreja who embraced and rekindled her faith in the Great Serpent. Andreja rejoiced in her rekindled faith in the Great Serpent. After the final battle with the Fallen Creator, she would return to Dazra and meet the High Council of Varun Kai, and share what she knew of the Unity, Starborn, and the multiverse. After being treated as a hero on a triumphant return, she would then be ordered by the Council to lead others of the faith to the Unity, where she and countless others would be reborn into new universes, free to spread their faith in the Great Serpent to the far reaches of the multiverse. Now I'm going to move on to Sam and Cora Ko here, since their stories are kind of intertwined with one another based on the narrative that I've crafted here. This is the ending for a Sam who emerged through the Unity and has been traveling the multiverse looking for his Korra, and a Korra who emerged through the Unity as a girl without her father and became resentful. But they do not connect or decide to forge a future together. Sam, heartbroken and unable to connect with Korra, leaves this universe to be reborn in another, continuing his quest to find his original Korra among the multiverse. And Korra, refusing to bond with this copy of the man who had abandoned her in the Unity, chooses to leave this universe, being reborn in another, in hopes she can finally escape her father and the memory of him. She would settle down in the next universe, becoming a ruthless mercenary and assassin for hire. Now, this ending takes the same two instances of Sam and Korra, but it's an ending where they do decide to connect and possibly rebuild their lives and bond together. Sam, joyous to have found a Korra to reconnect with, focuses the rest of his days on rebuilding their bond. After a few years of exploring together and fighting the remnants of the Dark Starborn, Sam starts a small ranch on a remote moon where his daughter visits him frequently, much to his endless joy. And Korako, having been convinced to let go of her resentment, finally forgives her father. They spend many years adventuring and fighting the remnants of the Dark Starborn together. Sam would eventually start a small ranch on a remote moon, and Korra would visit him frequently, where she would share stories of her travels with her father. She was content to finally have the relationship with him that she always wanted. Now, I really do like both of those endings. I think those are pretty fair and kind of accurate depictions of what could possibly happen. Because the way I always saw the whole Sam thing, I'm like, why is he letting Korra as a child go through the Unity? Because everyone kind of like assumed like, oh, we're going to emerge, and I don't know if I'll see you on the other side. And obviously you don't. So, these were just what I thought might happen, and I didn't want everything to be like, oh, everyone's having such a great time. Everything's so positive for everyone in the multiverse. I just kind of wanted to have maybe a more mature and kind of darker story. Maybe not dark in the sense that it's gruesome, but dark in the sense like it's maybe like emotionally kind of dark. So yeah, these next slides will cover a Korako who lost Sam to the Hunter. And this relationship is a bit different. This Sam sees Korra as like a cheap copy of his daughter, whereas this Korra is the one desperate to reconnect with Sam. And this slide will cover them not connecting. So Sam, unable to connect with what he sees as a cheap copy of his daughter, rejects this older Korra's attempts to bond with him. In anguish, he chooses to enter the Unity and be reborn into another universe, where he continues his desperate quest to find his original Korra. Korako, shunned by her father, becomes wrathful. She would enter the Unity and be reborn into a new universe, adopting the identity of the very person who took her father from her to begin with, the Hunter. She would become a scourge on the Constellation and Co family in multiple universes, seeing them as the cause of all of her woes. Now that one might be a little intense, Korra becoming the Hunter, but I don't think it's terribly far-fetched in the infinite expanse of the multiverse, and that one is pretty intense. If you're one of those people that enjoys kind of unleashing chaos on the multiverse, even if you don't get to see it directly, that's definitely going to be the ending for you. Me, I'm more of a just have the adoring fan on my ship and let him go through the Unity. But hey, to each their own. Now, these endings will cover those same instances of Sam and Korako, but only if they choose to reconnect. Sam finally stopped seeing this version of Korra as a cheap copy of his daughter. In time, he would embrace her, and they would begin the long process of rebuilding their relationship. In time, he would see this version of Korra needed him as much as he needed her. After a while, he would move back to Aquila City, much to the confusion of Sam, Korako, and the Lillian Heart of this universe. Eventually, Sam and Korra of this universe would bond with their Starborn counterparts, forming a loving, if at times, confusing bond. And Korako finally felt whole after finding and reconnecting with the father she had lost. She would spend her time traveling the settled systems, helping people recover from the war effort, and fighting the remnants of the Dark Starborn. When her father would move to Aquila City, she would meet this universe's version of her family, connecting with Sam, Lillian, and her younger self, inspiring her non-Starborn counterpart for the rest of her life. I actually really like that ending because I think it's kind of funny to have Sam and Cora meeting a version of Sam, Cora, and Lillian in this universe, because we don't really cover adding Constellation to this story, so maybe Constellation is no longer a thing in this universe that'd be going on, but I think that is kind of a fun thing, and it's funny to imagine Sam just running into himself in Aquila City and being confused as hell about it. Now, this next slide will focus on the Emissary feeling their entire mission to guard the artifacts had been a lie, as they're kind of seeing that control reflected on the side of the Dark Creator, or the Fallen Creator and the Dark Starborn. So the Emissary, convinced their work over hundreds of universes has been for nothing, begins to despair at this revelation. Leaving this universe behind, the Emissary chooses to be reborn in another, settling down and spending the rest of their days miserable over the fact that they led so many astray. I know that's pretty bare bones, but this next slide covers the Emissary who is convinced in the truth of their mission after your interactions. The Emissary, now more convinced on the importance of their mission than ever, chooses to enter the Unity and be reborn in another universe, where, like always, they fight and work their hardest to establish orders of guardians who protect the artifacts and the way to the Unity, creating many more responsible and well-meaning Starborn to watch over the multiverse. The multiverse, why did I say it like that? Anyway, you get what I'm saying there. And lastly, we move on to the Hunter, a fan favorite. Earlier in this video, I proposed two different versions of the Hunter, but I think they can have similar endings. One is the aggressive Hunter we all know and love, and the other one is more tired with all the violence and chaos and is beginning to see the appeal of the Keeper Aquilus lifestyle. So this ending slide covers the Hunter staying on the path we've known them to be on, the Path of the Hunter. Ooh, that's a callback to a previous DLC idea. The battle with the Fallen Creator reinvigorated the Hunter's love for combat and destruction and reminded him why he has always chased the artifacts in the Unity. Choosing to be reborn into another universe, the Hunter continued down his path of destruction and violence for many more cycles, taking great pleasure in attacking Constellation and New Atlantis. Maybe like that last part there is a bit of a punch in the gut to Constellation, and sorry guys that you're being attacked in the multiverse like that. This ending will follow the Hunter if they are convinced to slow down and embrace kind of the path of Keeper Aquilus. Having now seen all there is to see and done all there is to do, the Hunter would enter the Unity and be reborn one last time. But on the other side, a different man emerged. He called himself Aquilus. He would start a church known as the Sanctum Universum, guiding people to the Unity in his own, more subtle way. Aquilus would put his days as the Hunter behind him, and the people of New Atlantis would know him as a kind and well-meaning man of God, never knowing about the path of violence and destruction that led him there. And that kind of wraps up our ending slides for characters, which I frickin' love them. But we do have one more thing, and that's a question that's going to pop up on screen. You might be thinking, what about me, the player, and other versions of me? And one issue I was having when I was planning out these DLC ideas was, where do I put another Starborn version of us, the player character? As we all know, with people like Koriko, the Hunter, and ourselves, it's possible to have multiple versions of one person show up in a universe. Even multiple versions of a Starborn person. Case in point, when you kind of meet the evil Starborn version of yourself at Constellation in one of the New Game Plus scenarios. As well as a non-Starborn version of yourself taking their first steps with Constellation in that universe. That person being that universe's original version of you. I don't want you to think I forgot about this and didn't consider how to implement a version of us as the player on either side of the protagonist or as one of the Dark Starborn. It's perhaps your character could be the leader of the Dark Starborn, I don't know. Did think about it quite a bit, but maybe all my brain power was expended elsewhere. But I'm sure there are things we can think of right now to kind of add ourselves into the story. One story I came up with while kind of writing this little section focuses around an epilogue section of the Fallen Creator where you find a version of yourself a few months after the battle. You find this version of yourself and you're obviously surprised, and you can offer them advice. When I say you're obviously surprised, I mean this universe's version of you. Maybe you find them in the mines on Vectera, right? And depending on how you roleplay your character, because I think in an RPG, roleplaying is one of the most important things, and I think Bethesda did a far better job allowing the character to roleplay who they want to play in this game, far better than they did in Fallout 4, giving you kind of that narrow thing to fit into. You're a parent looking for a child. So I always kept roleplay at the heart of everything I came up with. So I think depending on how you roleplay, right, your character, if your time across the multiverse may not have been a pleasant one, or perhaps you miss the original version of your friends and family before everything became so diluted by multiple copies of the same person, you could convince them to stay in this universe. Let them know of your travels, and should they fall on the Constellation path, do not go through the Unity. And hopefully they would take that to heart. Or on the reverse of that, your time in the multiverse, like it has been for my main character's time in the multiverse, it's been a grand experience, the adventure of a lifetime. So you may want to encourage this universe's version of you to take that plunge and experience it all for themselves. And I know that my section about our character here doesn't have as much thought put into it as the other ones do. And you know, let me know how you would see other versions of your player character implemented into these DLC ideas, either Starborn or non-Starborn versions. I think there's a lot of room to explore and expand with it. I maybe didn't want to focus on it too much because everyone's opinions and roleplay is different. You know, when it comes to other versions of your character, you can't really choose how they're going to come out, right? Because you are that version of you, and you do things your way, whereas that other version of you is really an entirely person with their own thoughts, feelings, motivations, you know, from a you know, in-universe perspective. And so I don't want to impose too much on that. And lastly, I gotta say that's really all I have for now when it comes to interesting ideas about Starfield adding onto the experiences that we Starborn players can have in the Starfield multiverse. Now, if I come up with more, I may make another video about this. If you want to see a video, or if you want to see the video that inspired this one, I'll have it linked in the description, or you can just hop onto the channel page. It's a video called 8 Starborn-themed DLC Ideas for Starfield. Very creative, I know. And it covers these ideas in a much more bare-bones format, as well as smaller ideas I had, like the Starborn Arsenal, the Starborn Coliseum, and a couple others. So let's switch over to some Facecam for some final thoughts, thank yous, and goodbyes. And there we have it. I know that was a hefty frickin' video right there. But those, wow, my head is like so shiny. That is, I really should get some foundation for like just some powder for before I go on camera, because there's a light. I got 3 of them like right above me here. It's not like a YouTuber or set lights or anything. It's just literally the lights on my ceiling fan. But I know that was a lot there. But these 3 ideas I think are really, really good. And admittedly, I am being very biased. My favorite aspect of Starfield, I know people will say like shipbuilding or combat or, you know, whatever that may be, but for me it was always, once I finished the game, it was the whole Starborn thing, the new game plus. I think it's super, super cool, but I just don't think there's enough being done with it. It is, when you look at the nature of Starfield's universe, its multiverse, it's no question that there needs to be more to do in it. And I know it's fun to kind of go back and redo certain quest lines. Like I've done the Vanguard, and having the Starborn dialogue options is really good. But one thing I didn't mention in this video, because I came up with it earlier today while I was finishing this edit, is a Starborn skill tree. Once we become Starborn, that should be in there. How you have social, tech, combat, and, you know, whatever the other ones are. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's only one more. Social tech, combat, whatever. Well, there needs to be a Starborn one that I think should unlock higher abilities the more you go through the Unity. I think that would be really, really fun. Or kind of like ways to upgrade the powers besides just getting the temple, and now you're at level 2 of that power and it has a better duration or more damage or what have you. But I think that would actually be really cool. Starborn skill tree. And there's some some other things that I really think need to be done with it is, I kind of feel bad saying this, but because I know they don't like to gate off content to other players, right? And I'm not really suggesting that, but players that like haven't ascended to Starborn or don't want to leave their first universe because they got like 400 outposts and 300 cool ships, I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all. I understand. I had a hard time leaving my first universe, and I didn't have any of that going on. I mean, I had some cool ships, but for the most part, it was just, I just didn't want to leave my friends behind. But, man, the downside of these DLC ideas is it does kind of lock those players out of it. But Starfield doesn't have, like, the hardest leveling system. Like, it's not difficult to make like an end game level character in Starfield, so it's not crazy of me to assume that they would probably just start new characters and do everything they have to do there. That said, I really had a great time putting this one together, and Bethesda Starfield is on its last legs with a lot of people. There are some of us like me, like Angel, like Anna, like Mossy, like Rizmodius, all these fantastic people in our Discord server that really like Starfield. I mean, and we love it. We love it. You can look at the comments to my 8 Starborn themed DLC ideas video, and you'll find other people in there that really like this game. Puck Orowolf I saw in the comments, which Puck I imagine means Planetary Union Captain. Try and guess how I figured that out. And there was just so much love and excitement that people had in the comments talking about Starborn themed DLC ideas. And one sentiment I saw pop up in other areas I discussed this, as well as our Discord server. Somebody had mentioned like, oh, well, they've already got Starborn figured out, so the chances of your ideas affecting that are very small. And I'm not trying to affect the upcoming Starborn DLC, but I don't think there's any, just because they're making one doesn't mean that they can't make other Starborn themed DLCs or story expansions. I don't see why there just has to be just the one. And I know in Bethesda games in the past, because I'm doing research for another video, for the most part they tend to get like 2 story-themed DLCs. Blood Moon, Tribunal, Knights of the Nine, Shivering Isles. Fallout 3 kind of broke the mold here with the 5 it got, being Operation Anchorage, The Pit, Broken Steel, Point Lookout, and Mothership Zeta. Skyrim also got 2, Dragonborn and Dawnguard. Fallout 3 got 2.5. Automatron was kind of a workshop DLC with a little story, just like kind of the Vault one, but for the most part, I would say it was Far Harbor and Nuka World. And I don't want Starfield to just be Shattered Space and Starborn. I would love to see so much more there, because Bethesda, the dev cycles have been, let's be honest, it's been quite slow, and that's a whole nother complaint on its own. I don't even want to dig that. I don't want to dig that up. What I do want is to see Starfield have a mess of content for it, because I don't use mods. I don't use Creation Club, and I have nothing against it. It's just not for me. I play vanilla games, and I know that probably sounds super boring to a lot of people that are on PC. I'm on PC. I know how that sounds to you all. I'm the guy that's been playing Vanilla Oblivion since it released for 20 years fairly regularly. Vanilla Skyrim, Vanilla Fallout 3, New Vegas, Morrowind, all of it. I love it. I make no apologies for enjoying the games the way I want to enjoy them. But one of the ways that the games stay fresh for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only player like this, people on PC, yeah, they have mods, so games are always fresh. That's why Skyrim is still so active. But the game stays fresh for me through official updates and official content drops. And I know there's not going to be a Starfield 2 for a very long time, if there ever is one at all. I don't know if there ever will be. It seems like that game is way too early in its life, and the development cycles are a bit too slow over at Bethesda to even consider thinking about Starfield 2 right now. Not with Starborn in development, Elder Scrolls 6, and probably pre-production for Fallout 5. So I'm not even gonna speculate on a Starfield 2, which is why I'm greedy to have more content for this one. But I just think these are really fun ideas too, and I think a lot of the community would agree with me, assuming this video gets out to the rest of the community. And I'm begging you, Bethesda, please, I'm begging you. Let's talk about it. You don't have to reach out to me, but you do have creators and you do have fans in this community that like this game. I think you're avoiding a bit too much criticism with it. And I get there's a lot of hate, but I think a lot of it just comes from a place of love. And as I said at the beginning of this video, I want to see all Bethesda games succeed, especially Starfield. Starfield's the newest one. I've had a lot of fun with it. I've had a lot of fun in the base game. Didn't have any fun with Shattered Space, but I can, I can chalk that up to, that's fine. That's an L. You take the L on the chin. Hopefully Starborn will be good, but maybe some of these ideas I proposed here could be, maybe this one you got coming out, call it Starborn Chapter 1. And then the other ones, or maybe even give it like a subtitle too, like Starborn Chapter 1 and boom, whatever, whatever your story's going to be here. And then Starborn Chapter 2, the paths, boom, Path of the Emissary, Path of the Hunter, respectively. And then Starborn Chapter 3, boom, the Fallen Creator. And that's, 3 different DLC ideas right there, packaged up. It's just, the multiverse is the coolest, to me, element of the game, and it's kind of neat, because in Skyrim, you kind of become the Dragonborn very quickly, and you don't really get to play out a background. For me, it's almost been like my main quest has just been, how many times can I go through the Unity? And my main character, for him, the fight for the artifacts and stuff has become like an obsession, but he's kind of like the hunter now. It's like, for him, it's a thrill. And I just want to have more for him to do in the multiverse. I want to have more options. I want to explore more things. I want to be the emissary. I want to be the hunter. I want to assume their identities. I want to fight a fucking fallen god. Like, how fucking cool would that be? So much of it would be cool. Reach out to me. Let's talk. I know I've only got 600 subscribers, but that's 600 people that, are at least mildly interested in things I have to say, and I think... And I think a few of them would be quite interested in this. I know a lot of people in our Discord community really love this game. There's a lot that don't like the game, but I'd like to see them brought onto the bandwagon. And we have a couple that are like iffy about it. And, they kind of play it, but it's not really their cup of tea, because it doesn't make them feel the same way Skyrim did. It doesn't make them feel the same way Fallout 4 did. Or, going as far back as Morrowind and Oblivion, Fallout 3. But it's made me feel a good portion of that. Shattered Space didn't, and I know I keep harping on Shattered Space. I'm sorry, but, I can only speak the way I feel. And I just really want to see the game succeed, and I know I'm a broken record here in this outro segment, and I make no apologies for that. I only do it out of pure love for this game and a desire to see it succeed, and I hope that this video kind of gets around to the Starfield community, and Bethesda starts talking to maybe some content creators or people in the community that have a little bit of a creative bone in their body, and they want to talk to us and get our ideas for future content. It would, I'd like it. I'd love to be like, hey, just take that idea, take it for free, but I got a mortgage, I got a car payment. It's not very affordable where I live, so, I could use the income. I don't make any money off YouTube. In fact, YouTube actively costs me money. So, let's talk about it, Bethesda. And to each of you that watch this video, if you're a Starfield fan like me, drop down in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss some things. And if you're not, let me know what you don't like about the game. I would love to at least try and, offer a better explanation of why I enjoy it, if that's maybe not something you agree with. But more than anything, I am just so grateful that you took time out of your day to be here with me, and I will see you in the next one.